I'm Rabbi Noah Farkas. I'm president and CEO of the Jewish Federation Los Angeles. Really nice to have you here. In a minute, I'm just going to introduce our panel, but just want to share a couple of very, very brief remarks. We've seen this uptick of anti-Semitism happening on campus in various different ways over various different years. Whether it was in the early days, what feels almost like the easy times of fighting against the anti-Semitic version of the ethnic studies curriculum, to seeing anti-Semitism creep into classrooms in K-12 spaces, to seeing it happening in admissions councils, to seeing it now at the 10/7, literally 2 days after, seeming to Jewish students suddenly being unsafe, Jewish faculty being unsafe, Jewish students and faculty and staff members all on campuses being accosted, harassed, and intimidated. And we at the Federation in LA have been working for years on this, and it is now a central focus of our work. Since last year, we built a comprehensive strategy to fight against anti-Semitism. And in that comprehensive strategy is to find where anti-Semitism is occurring, work with our partners like the EDL, HAC, and many, many others to record and understand those incidences, but also begin to understand that to fight anti-Semitism, we have to take a people-centered, project-centered, and system-centered approach. By people-centered, I mean we have to train leaders on campus, in faculty, in the Jewish polity itself, amongst Jews and our allies, to organize for power, to be able to fight back against the creeping systemic anti-Semitism we see across California, but really on campus. And our work with the Campus Impact Network, who we have a large contingent that's here today, and with what we call AIA, we have a large contingent here today, and with ULP, a large contingent we have here today, and with NLP, which is my personal favorite, no offense to the other ones, but I used to run NLP at the Federation, who also has a large contingent here today. We're showing up in this public space to stand up for Jewish values and put our values in action. So I'm really, really excited to be here with all of you. We have an esteemed panel, and the goal of today's conversation is to give a little more color to what's happening on campus from a student perspective, from a faculty perspective, and from an NGO or nonprofit perspective. And that's because we have to understand what's really happening so that we can name what it is and then try to fix it. And so this morning we have really amazing panelists that will engage in conversation. If we have some time, we'll do some Q&A at the end. First, I want to welcome the Honorable Steve Glazer, Senator Steve Glazer, who is here from the Legislative Jewish Caucus. He's been a prolific writer of law, over 24 laws, and he has been a CSU trustee for a number of years, I think before coming into this, and he is focusing on this issue very tightly. Senator Glazer, it's great to have you here. A good friend, Robert Trestan, is here, who's the Vice President of the West Division of the Anti-Defamation League. So great to have ADL as a partner to Federation as we build out security together, as well as our anti-Semitism roundtable. Robert, it's really great to have you here. Gregg Drinkwater is here. He's the program director at the UC Berkeley Anti-Semitism Education Initiative, giving us another perspective of what's happening, not just on that campus, but as a model that we can look at for all campuses. Gregg, great to have you here. And Danielle Levin here, who is the Student Government Vice President at Occidental College. Really wonderful to have you here. Thank you for taking the time of being with us. Now, at Federation, everything we do on campus is student-centered. The number one question we ask when it comes to safety, security, Jewish identity, Jewish joy, and Jewish expression is how do we support the students? So Danielle, I'm going to begin with you. Maybe share a little bit about what your experience has been at Occidental, of what you're willing to share, comfortable to share. What does anti-Semitism feel like? Give us that really sort of granular look.
Yeah, I mean, Oxy is a really small school, both our student body and our campus, and things have like the protests going on have really consumed a lot of aspects of living on campus, and as a Jewish student, that's been, I think, pretty intense for us as a community to kind of navigate. I mean, there have been almost, at some points in the year, like weekly protests, sometimes multiple times a week. We had some buildings that were, our admin building was occupied. It's just been very visible and very loud. And I think like maintaining our Jewish identity within that has been difficult with a lot of the speech that's used sometimes can feel very targeted towards us. I think a lot of us have had kind of individual experiences with people kind of making comments about kind of necklaces that we wear or kind of events that we're holding, and it's just been very hard to kind of feel like we're living Jewishly and like being active in our community. But I mean, the anti-Semitism component has been huge. A lot of students don't understand anti-Semitic rhetoric, and I think a lot of administration also doesn't. And it's difficult when people aren't properly educated. I'd like to think a lot of what's happening kind of on our campus isn't intentionally anti-Semitic, and that people are kind of participating in larger trends and stuff without kind of adequate knowledge. But it's been a lot to navigate as a student. Our Hillel community has been wonderful. We're supported a lot by JFED LA. But yeah.
Can you maybe, thank you for sharing that. Just to go one step further, so it sounds like there's a bit of a spectrum of people who are like really anti-Semitic and people who think it's cool to be anti-Semitic. Can you just dive into a little bit? Like, what do you think is driving some of that on campus? Is it internal factors? Are there external agitators? What's your experience? And just share whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah, I think from kind of what I've seen, both as a Jewish student and also kind of on the student government side, watching what's happening kind of around campus life, there is definitely kind of a group of people that does kind of understand the broader behavior and kind of what is happening on campus. But I think a lot of people, from what I've seen, it's very flashy and large and loud on campus, and I think there are a lot of people kind of joining in on kind of, if there's a protest happening on the quad, people kind of will just trickle in as they get out of classes and kind of hang around and participate in chants and holding signage and things like that, that they may not have the broader context for. I think that, and also that's something that I've been seeing a lot on social media among my peers, is kind of reposting things that kind of contain harmful language, because it's kind of just what's happening like within social circles right now and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And are you experiencing this from faculty too, or mostly students? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a faculty and academic component as well. I mean, all clubs on campus are advised by faculty, so there's a group of faculty that's pretty hands-on with the protests that are happening. There's also, some faculty that are very hands-on with helping Jewish students in Hillel. But there have been, luckily I haven't experienced anything in the classroom, but I do have peers where they've been singled out by professors, or professors have, moved classes to the building that was being occupied, kind of things like that. And that's something that we're trying to work with the school on a lot, also getting more Jewish studies classes into our curriculum and our religious studies department. But it's definitely, it doesn't end with students. I think it has really consumed all aspects of campus for faculty, students, administrators, parents, everything.
And have you yourself ever felt unsafe physically, emotionally?
Definitely. I think particularly when our administrative building was occupied and when we had an encampment over the last couple weeks at school. The school's less than 2,000 students. We all know each other. People know kind of who participates in Hillel and that I'm Jewish, and at times, I've depending on what's going on campus, taken off my necklace or, gone to classes online, which, I mean, a lot of my peers have done as well. And honestly, for me, the scarier part during some of, like, the occupation in the encampment wasn't necessarily my peers, but, like, outside individuals who are coming in. But, yeah, there's definitely a loss of a sense of security, which is difficult when you're, living there, going to school there, participating in social life there.
I'm sorry to hear that. We're going to just widen the lens a little bit. So I'm turning to you, Robert, and talk a little bit about safety seems to be one of the hallmarks on both sides of this conversation. People who do the protests and are in the encampments talk about anything that makes them uncomfortable somehow attacks their psychological safety. And then we have this idea of Jewish safety, whether it's psychological or physical safety. So maybe can you talk a little bit from your perspective as the ADL rep in the room, where do you see that sort of trickle through, and what are the tools that ADL is using to address some of these issues?
Thanks, Rabbi Farkas. First, I just want to appreciate you because you mentioned at the beginning something that was really important, and I want everyone to just recognize that there are a lot of Jewish organizations that are working in alignment on this issue. And if you remember what was said last night, like, we're working together and we're actually stronger and more powerful when we're doing it together, and you're one of the people that's actually helping to bring all of us together. So I just want to appreciate that. It's really, really important.
Proud to do it.
So there's a lot of different tools that can be used in this current moment, and some of them are short-term, like how do we make Danielle's life at Occidental's campus better right now, the current moment, or in the fall? And then there are how do we fix this in the long term? I want to just sort of answer your question, Rabbi Farkas, on like Title VI, because it's been mentioned multiple times, like in the last 24 hours. It's all over the place. But let me just say what Title VI is. Title VI refers to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is a provision in the United States Civil Rights Act that basically says if you are a recipient of $1 of federal money, Occidental Colleges receives money. Just think about all the student loans, federal money that flows into schools across the country. You cannot discriminate based upon race or national origin. Actually, religion is not even included in the way that this is written, but it is, the current interpretation is that Jews, people of all faiths, are actually protected. And the way it works is it's not a lawsuit, right? The Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., their local branches is in San Francisco. They are responsible for making sure that recipients, educational recipients of federal money, don't discriminate. If you think there's a discrimination, you can file a complaint. And that's what a Title VI complaint is. And it results in an investigation, not a lawsuit. It actually protects anyone who files the complaint. So unlike a lawsuit where, a student, a faculty person would be subject to, deposition, cross-examination, going to court, here, the people who file the complaints have the ability to remain anonymous. And we've seen that from dozens and dozens of Jewish students in these cases across the country. And the government, the DOE, is responsible for conducting the investigation. And if they find violations, the sanction is, it's not like a lawsuit where you think people are going to get money. The sanction is the school loses access to federal money. It's a big, big sanction. I want to mention two other points here that are really important. If you listened to what Danielle was describing, you will see she talked about not just one incident, right? Things that happen over a period of time. When you read these complaints, you will see the words hostile environment. Think about like workplace hostile environment. It's very common in the workplace. You will see hostile environment. You will see pervasive anti-Semitism happening over a period of time. You will read about how students, and in many cases also faculty, employees, who are not able to enjoy their workplace without disruption of campus impacts someone. So It basically means that students are not able to fully enjoy the education environment, not able to benefit or take advantage of a federal right. And that right legally is connected through the dollars. ADL actually has filed a Title VI case against Occidental College. We filed a case against Pomona. And we also, by the way, this applies to K through 12. So there's a pending case at Berkeley Unified School District as well. And these cases, for the most part, result, I would argue, most of them will result in some type of settlement. The best example I can give you quickly is the University of Vermont, which was a case that was filed in, I think, 2020. It took 2 years to resolve. It also represents the first case where the Biden administration actually used the IRA definition to define campus anti-Semitism. Now, you're all familiar with the IRA definition. And so most campuses, there's only a handful of campuses in the country that have adopted the IRA definition. But what's super important here is there is an executive order that then President Trump, signed in December of 2019 that allowed the Department of Education to use the IRA definition when it is making determinations and investigating campus anti-Semitism. If you read the Occidental complaint that we filed, you'll see that executive order actually cited in it. So while many campuses are just pretty much outright dismissive of the IRA definition, what's important for us is that the government who is making assessments about campus anti-Semitism is using it right now. And that's really important. And that University of Vermont case, the settlement, is what it was based on. So if you connect Zionism to your Jewish identity, that is legally connected to your shared ancestry, and you are protected by Title VI. And I do believe over the next few years when you see these cases resolved, and in every case we actually have recommendations for how they should be settled, I hope, we will see an evolution of how campuses deal with anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Robert. That's really enlightening. There are many tools in our tool belt working together to fight anti-Semitism in our cities and on campus. And one of them is being litigious. We're lawyers, we're Jews, what can I say? But the truth is, there are other tools too, and I'll get to some of those at the end, but I do want to bring Gregg into this conversation because even though you're not technically a faculty member, you do serve as a program director of a very important program at UC Berkeley. So maybe share a little bit of the faculty perspective and how are you addressing it from your side?
Yeah, so thank you. So I'm housed in the Center for Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley, and I work on campus anti-Semitism at Berkeley and at other universities in the state and across the country. And my program is called the Antisemitism Education Initiative. And I wanted to emphasize that because the key word in those 3 words is education. Right? So I'm focusing on this not from a litigation perspective, not from an advocacy perspective, not necessarily even from a policy perspective if we think about policies being then therefore enforcement mechanisms and punishments and consequences, but rather education. And I think education is going to be crucial moving forward on this. And the reason why I say that is that we've already heard a little bit about what's driving some of the students in particular and others who are joining the protests and the encampments at various campuses in California and across the country. And there are lots of factors that we can point to as contributing to that, right? There's binary thinking and polarization, which is informing our political moment broadly. There's the simplification of social media and the TikTok generation, all of those sorts of things. There's the desire to fit in, which was Danielle already mentioned. But I sometimes see within the Jewish community, on social media, and even in the press, some sort of conspiratorial thinking, assuming that this is also a conspiracy theory, right? That there's some hidden hand driving this. And as Jews, I think we should be wary of using conspiracy theories, right? We know where those come from. And when I say that it's not a conspiracy theory, is not to mean that there aren't some insidious outside actors. Absolutely, there are. There are some insidious forces. There are liberal forces globally, locally, and nationally contributing to these dynamics. Absolutely true. But these protests, these encampments would be happening even if they weren't so prominently involved, right? So we need to think about what's actually going on in terms of what students know about anti-Semitism, about Jewish history, about Jewish culture, about bias, about harassment, all of these things. The educational role is crucial. And I want to assure you that we often hear also in the press this focus on faculty who are bad actors. And again, not denying that there aren't. There are some egregious examples, absolutely. But I want to point to a piece of data from a study done in December, or released in December, from Brandeis University. And in that, they asked students, Jewish students from across the country, about their experiences of hostile anti-Semitic or anti-Israel behavior or statements on campus. 80%, 80, in that study, so the vast majority, referenced hearing those kinds of statements from peers, from other students. Only 30%, 30, referenced hearing those things from faculty. Now, 30% is still too much, right? Obviously. And we can have a debate about the methodology of that and whether those numbers are accurate, but the general idea being that actually, although we focus in the press on faculty as bad actors, as outside groups as bad actors, really a lot of this is peer-to-peer interaction. It's people saying horrific things on TikTok and Instagram. It's people saying things in the dorms, in the classroom, but not, from the faculty, but from among students, right? And again, not to deny that there aren't other things going on. Nothing is ever reducible to a single cause. But if we have that level of anti-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Israel rhetoric coming from students, we have to figure out what are we going to do about that, right? Punishment isn't going to stop it. Focusing on some insidious outside cabal is not going to stop it. Education is going to stop it. And that's why I wanted, again, emphasize that the work I do is rooted in education. And that's what universities are about. I mean, that's the whole reason we're there, right? So with the support of Jewish agencies, with the support of state legislative bodies, we really need to lean in to focusing on education in K through 12, in college settings, through having a more holistic and representative ethnic studies mandate, depending on how that plays out, right? There are things that we can do, and we need to focus on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Education is really important. So we've heard a little bit of the student perspective, a little bit of the legal perspective, education perspective. I'd like to turn it to Senator Glazer to talk about the legislative perspective, another arm of what federations in support of JPAC is able to do. In fact, many reasons why we're here today. So can you talk a little bit about what you've been working on and specifically the bills that you've been focusing on?
Great, thank you. And I'm honored to be here. I thank you, each of you, for being here. As we talked about last night, it's so impactful that you're here. And yes, you're learning, but it's also about your voice in your community and here in the Capitol, and it's a big deal. So thank you all for being here. Let me go to I wish it wasn't an iconic moment in our political life, but I'll take you back to the hearing of the Congress, where university presidents were invited in to address the issues of intimidation and harassment of students on campuses. And the question was cast, does calling for genocide violate the student code of conduct on your campus? Everybody saw that? Yeah, that's our social media. See, that's working well. And all of our consternation about how it was all handled and what those university presidents said, and obviously there was consequences to that. But that was an impactful exchange, irrespective of who asked the question. That really got a lot of us here in the Legislative Jewish Caucus, and I'm sure many of you started thinking about, wait a second, how can there not be an answer to that? And as we talk about, things in Israel are very complex, the First Amendment is also very complex in terms of what it allows a campus to do or a campus leader to do or to not do. So as a part of the inquiry, the Legislative Jewish Caucus, we have an incredible group that you saw last night. It's quite large. we had a retreat in January where we brought in experts to talk with us about that issue, to try to understand what is possible, that we saw a failure of leadership on the campuses. Now, what can we do from a legislative point of view, if at all, to try to address that and to answer that question? Does calling for genocide violate a student code of conduct? And so we were blessed with some lawyerly expertise from Hillel, from wonderful insight from JPAC and from the federations and from many others, to try to understand whether there was a legislative solution to help it with that lack of acknowledgement and the consequences of that, lack of protection for Jewish students and others from hate speech or harassment or intimidation or calls for violence or calls for genocide. And so out of that, we got educated, and it really became the basis for the legislation, which I will talk about, and I think you're going to share your views on across the street when you're there. That's Senate Bill 1287. But at the foundation of that question was a number of Supreme Court actions that have repeatedly held that schools need not tolerate speech that is inconsistent with its basic educational mission. That includes speech that is likely to deprive others of access to the educational opportunities or benefits provided by the school, or that interferes with the free speech rights of others. So that's a holding by our national court in numerous cases that gives us now the room to try to address what we see, the free speech of others, the harassment, the intimidation, the advocacy for violence that we are seeing on the campuses. And again, the court has looked at it in the uniqueness of what is a college and university campus, because that is a unique place in our world, and they've acknowledged it, and that's the maneuverability that allows us to advance the legislation that I'm going to review. So the principles of free speech come within the broader frame of higher education. And so we have gone to that by focusing on the student code of conduct that every student should review and should acknowledge and adhere to force the type of languages which I just talked about protecting the free speech of others, about hate speech, of promotion of intimidation, harassment, violence, and genocide, to ensure that the colleges all have that obligation to have their student code of conduct be explicit in those places, and that students have to acknowledge it and adhere to it on the campuses. And of course, advancing that in a context of civility and mutual respect. And so that's the heart of what Senate Bill 1287 attempts to do. It's attempting to go right at this issue of intolerance and hostility and interfering in the freedom of speech of everyone, not just the people that are speaking. And that's the central part of what we're trying to do in the legislation. So we hope that it does two things. One, it answers that question. Does calling for genocide violate your student code of conduct? So there'll be no ambiguity in what any university leader would say in that space. And number two, to inject our activism among university leadership that we want them to do more to ensure the protection of free speech for everybody, not just Jewish students, but everybody.
Thank you. And if you don't know enough about SB 1287, you will find out that's all part of what we're going through, getting ready for this afternoon. We are going to open it up to Q&A for a few minutes. I'm going to kick off the first question. I just want to know, do I call on people? Do we have someone who's doing that? I don't. Okay, yay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I want to ask one question before we open it up. So we talked a little bit about your experience, and we talked about legal remedies, educational remedies, and legislative remedies. What we haven't really talked about is what's not okay. What is not okay for us as a Jewish community to do to fight against anti-Semitism? We saw in LA, where I live, probably the most egregious example of something that's not okay, which is assault and battery. That's I would hope we would affirm in here that that is simply not okay. Like, that's just not okay. We at Federation, as a convener of the Jewish community, wants to put every tool on the table that we can. So maybe we should at least start by, and it's just, go ahead, anyone can answer this question here. What are some of the tools that we should not be putting on the table so that we don't lose who we are as human beings in this process? So, yeah, go ahead, Gregg.
One thing that we've pointed out a number of times to campus administration at Berkeley is that one of the things that allowed the escalation of incidents at Berkeley was the fact that Jewish community members, Jewish students, Jewish faculty and staff weren't taking the bait, weren't stepping up and becoming bad actors, right? We were following policies, we were following procedures, we were being respectful. Had Jewish community acted out in maybe perhaps in the way it happened at UCLA, things would have been different. It would have sort of forced the hand of the administration. I'm glad that didn't happen. I would not have wanted to force the hand of the administration in that way. But I want to point out that the litany of policy violations, procedural violations, bad action, bad speech, bad behavior that we saw on Berkeley campus and many others was not, at least at Berkeley, matched by similar behavior from Jewish and Israeli advocates, Jewish and Israeli students, faculty, and staff. So I think playing within the rules is important, even if sometimes maybe things move more slowly than we'd like.
Sure. Robert, did you want to, look like you wanted to add
No,
something?
I totally agree. I think we need to not take the bait, and I think we have a lot of options. Like you're listening to options. We need to use them, and we need to be patient. We need to be strategic, and we should not be taking matters into our own hands. That doesn't work. Actually, it backfires. And I think it's also okay to just say that we respect the humanity of a lot of people, not just Jews and Israelis that are being killed and targeted. But it's okay to say that we are Zionists and we also respect Palestinian life. Like those two things can
100%.
actually happen in the same sentence.
Thank you. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. I saw a gentleman in a white shirt over there. Did you still have a question? Yeah. Okay. Nice and loud, though, so I can hear you. Okay, so the question is about the speed of reaction in Florida versus what some of the things, the University of Florida versus some of the things we saw here. Yeah, just trying to get the question real tight because I want to get as many questions as possible.
First a disclaimer, ADL is a 501c3, so we do not favor any particular political candidates. But I will answer your question in the context. There are a number of campuses where the problems are far, far less. And there are a number of schools in Florida where that is the case. There are some schools in Texas. University of Miami is not a public school. It's a private university, but they laid down the law on October the 8th. There are a number of campuses that made decisions early on. This is free speech. This is academic freedom. Break the rules, cross the line, you'll be punished. And those are the schools that don't have encampments. Those are the schools where commencement has not been disrupted. Those are the schools without Title VI cases. Like, it is possible. And so there is some leadership that's responsible for that, some at the state level. I mean, we're seeing a lot of state leadership here, so we should not ignore that.
Okay. Why hasn't California acted in the same way? I don't know.
I'm passing it to the elected official.
Well, I'll tell you that our patience has run out. And just yesterday, the actions by the Sonoma State president to capitulate to the illegal encampments on their campus is outrageous. Outrageous. And we had this beautiful differ last night, and I can tell you that for 2 hours there was text exchange among many of those Jewish Legislative Caucus colleagues about what we just learned about Sonoma and what we should do about it. So at Sonoma, what's happening is these university presidents are so in fear of a no confidence vote by their faculty and students, that's just my opinion, that they capitulate.
Some of us share that opinion, by the way.
Say again?
Some of us share that opinion.
Okay, so they capitulate to these illegal encampments for various reasons. And a part of that capitulation is to meet with them, that's fine, dialogue, that's fine, but to make commitments about how the university is going to deal with their investment portfolio or their vendor portfolio, or how they're going to handle exchanges with Israeli universities, how they're going to handle exchanges with Israeli students. And it is a BDS-like concessions that these university presidents are making. And at Sonoma, the gall to say that we should conduct ourselves without bias, and then they say we're not going to have any exchanges with Israeli universities or Israeli students that are formally representatives of those universities, is an incredible act of anti-Semitism and bias. And it really pisses us off. Okay?
Appreciate that.
I don't know if that's the right vocabulary. And so we are considering I love the mission of our higher education institutions. I mean, people who know me as a trustee and how I work in the legislature in that space, it's incredibly important. And yet, for me to think about how I'm going to now answer that question, what are we going to do when we see that hypocrisy and outrageous conduct on campuses? It has us all saying, well, we know what the levers are. We don't want to pull them. We know the levers. And that's called budget. That's called budget. Okay?
Can I
Yes,
just add
right.
one quick thing? I've read a bunch of
go
these letters from campus administrators, and some of them I disagree with, some of them I disagree with a lot. When I read the Sonoma State one, I am not joking, I thought it was The Onion. And I don't say that as a joke. I literally thought it was The Onion. I had to verify this was not a hoax. So if you haven't read it, go read it, because it's mind-boggling.
Please. So I'm just going to repeat so people can hear it. The question is, if the campus were illegal from the very beginning, why were they ever allowed to get started in the first place? Does anyone care to give a response?
Yeah. It's because of the hypocrisy of campus leadership that has this appropriate desire for accommodation and conversation and civility, and it breaks down. And the thing that you will hear from us when we talk to campus leaders is that this hypocrisy of treating Jews differently than everybody else. What's the deal? If this was happening to LGBT or to African Americans or Latinos, this would never happen on these campuses. And you can go back to the months ago and all these actions. And so we are raising it. We've had so many conversations with President Drake of UC and Chancellor Garcia, who was a part of our text exchange last night at 11 o'clock at night. She's saying, hey, this was against our policy. I don't know what happened. So we are talking to them to try to figure it out. But our criticism is they're not treating Jewish students and Jews the same as everybody else. And that's all we ask for.
That's right.
Is to be treated the same.
That's right.
If you look, University New Hampshire and Dartmouth, they tried to set up an encampment, and they said if you do it, it's coming down. At University of New Hampshire, it was gone with police within an hour, and at Dartmouth, it was the same thing. Within 60 minutes, no encampment. They made a decision, we're not allowing it.
Question is around consequences for essentially breaking their own codes of conduct and breaking their own rules.
Well, this is something that is being argued in the Title VI
Correct,
cases,
that's
but I would say that there is an opportunity here for everyone here, because if you have an affiliation, you're a parent, you're an alumni, you're a donor, there are many, many channels where people are putting pressure on presidents and campuses, right? That they need, the next frontier, by the way, is the divestment. Like the encampments will be pretty much gone within 2 weeks. We're going to go into the summer, and then behind the scenes, all these little deals that have been made are going to start to materialize. And unless we maintain pressure on these campuses, and it's not just the organizations, it has to be the people who have a connection, we're going to have to mount a lot of pressure
Right.
and hold them accountable.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just and then one thing of housekeeping. I think that the encampments are going to disappear within a week or two because everyone wants to go to the beach instead of stay at a closed mess hall on campus. But I am worried about August, and I'm specifically worried about between August and November. Because if you don't think that this is going to be leveraged for the presidential election by one side or the other, like you have to understand the complexity of the situation. So I see like 12.5 people who want to ask questions, which is awesome. I love Jews. They're so good at asking questions. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take like 3 questions, package them, have them answer, take 3 questions, package them, and then we're going to have to close. So we'll start over here. We'll just do some folks over here. Yeah.
Question for Robert, since the settlements seem to be kind of the outcome of the Title VI suits, what does an appropriate settlement look like?
Okay. So appropriate settlement. Let's do a couple more. Sean?
Just how do we appropriately protect academic freedom, which has been good for the Jews and Jewish
We're balancing academic freedom in the back over there. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so anti-BDS at state level, maybe one more. Yes, right here.
I'd like to add to the BDS movement, Students for Justice for Palestine.
SJP. Okay, so we got academic freedom, SJP, BDS, and consequences, and what is the settlement for Title VI? Can you answer all of that in the next 3 to 5 minutes, please? Who would like to go first?
I'll just say on the settlements, I would encourage you to just go and look up these complaints because we actually list them, but adopting the IRA definition is one of them. Enforcing your own policies is another one. Setting up task forces to engage students and faculty to make Jewish life on campus better. And the nice thing about the settlements is they're monitored. So every organization, we all have a list of this is what we recommend. Every single Jewish organization's got one right now on their website. When you have a settlement, the Department of Education has to monitor it to make sure that they actually follow the recommendations.
Any of the other?
On BDS, we think there are current provisions in law that prevent that type of BDS-like activity. We're going to look at it. As I said, we had a lot of exchanges last night to see whether it does apply and can be, or does it have to be updated in some fashion to prevent this type of boycotting that the Sonoma State president it seems to be advocating for.
I want to say 2 quick things on academic freedom since I'm housed at a university. One is I talk with faculty and students, for that matter, a lot about this particular point. And yes, academic freedom at universities is sacrosanct, but that doesn't mean that therefore you can or should say whatever you want, even in the context that's relevant to your expertise. You need to think about, is it a good idea? Is it serving a pedagogical purpose? I talk about this with faculty all the time. You have a reading X, an assignment Y, what have you, that absolutely it's pedagogic, it's relevant topically rather to the course, but do you need to do it pedagogically? If it's going to offend, hurt, or cause other people to, in the room, in the classroom to feel isolated, why do it? Serve your pedagogical purpose another way, right? So that's one answer to that. And then the second is that for students in particular, that we often talk about hate speech, right? And reminder, there are no laws banning hate speech, right? There are laws about hate crimes. And then there are other ways that we can get at hate speech indirectly through other laws, but there's no actual laws banning hate speech. But again, it doesn't mean just say whatever because there's no law preventing it. Don't be an asshole. Like, sorry for my language, but like, I talk about this again. It works well with students, like the tier of assholeness, right? Just don't be an asshole. Even if you're not violating a policy, even if you're not violating a law. Like, why? Why?
Thank you.
I would just say that academic freedom is not having your class assemble in the middle of an encampment, all right, and threaten the safety and well-being of all your students, okay? That's not academic freedom. We want to protect it, but there are limits that we should enforce.
Just on SJP, Brandeis University said, no, you violated the rules, you're out, that's it. You can't be a student group anymore. So When you think about the rules, those rules apply to student groups. There are all sorts of codes of conduct for how student groups are supposed to behave on a college campus. And one of the things we saw at Occidental was a collaboration between faculty and SJP completely fueling this pervasive environment on campus that just allowed anti-Semitism to flourish. That's all in our complaint. So SJP bears a lot of responsibility.
And JV.
Yeah,
others
JVP
too.
as well. They're working together.
Correct. We're going to have to close in just one moment. So I want to ask Danielle, you had the first word. I'm going to give you the last word. What else do you need from us, your Jewish community, elected officials, NGOs, rabbis who are here? What else do you need from us to make you feel comfortable, safe, and supported on campus?
I think that kind of a lot of the big things when I think about just like my experience and how groups like JPAC LA and the ADL have kind of supported our community through our experiences over this past year in college. Just a lot of continued support, education, programming. I especially think the education component is missing at a lot of our schools, like doing community outreach, working with legislators. I've found that a lot of the work that's been most impactful for my experience so far has been a lot of the conversations that have happened behind the scenes with school administration and things like that, which the ADL has played a very large part in. So just kind of continuing to keep an eye on things and be an advocate for us. We really appreciate
for that.
everyone.
Take one point of prerogative and then we're going to close. The last thing I want to add to all of this was a little bit what Robert said, but I just want to underscore it 3 times. We are in what I feel like is the fight of our lifetimes about Jewish identity, Jewish protection on campus, Jewish joy, Holocaust erasure, you name it. It's going to take all of us. And all of us have different lanes. All of us have different views. Not all of us are going to, we're Jews. Not all of us are going to agree on how to move forward. But the work we're doing, at least at our federation, of trying to ground this work in community and to establish working agreements with organizations so we all move forward together in our own voices is what it's going to take. And so I want to thank, for example, all of the organizations that participate in the LA-based Roundtable on Anti-Semitism, including Stand With Us, AJC, ADL, the Board of Rabbis, LA Museum of the Holocaust, Museum of Tolerance, the Aguda is involved. There are so many involved. If you don't have that in your community, I would strongly suggest to form a working group of professionals that can work together to lift us all up together. And that, by the way, is what it means to put your values in action, which is what we stand for at JFED LA. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our panelists for being here, Danielle especially. Thank you for sharing.